Hello everyone. My name is Janine White. I am the Project Manager for Transport Data Initiatives, and welcome to the TDI 9th webinar, which is focusing on the ADEPT Live Labs, innovation in our local roads, current and future innovation. We'll be joined today by 4 fantastic speakers who will be sharing their journeys with you, and I will be also sharing the presentation slide deck and the recording with you all after the webinar to keep and to also share with your colleagues and your contacts. We have a question and answer session towards the end of the webinar, so if you do have any questions throughout the webinar itself, then please use the little speech bubble in the top right hand corner where it has the question mark, and enter your question in there and we will try and get that answered for you. However, if we don't get round to answering all your questions, please don't worry, because we will answer all the questions and share all the questions and answers after the webinar has finished. I hope you enjoy the webinar today, and I will now be handing over to our speaker, Giles Perkins, who will be providing an introduction to the ADEPT Live Labs programme. Welcome, Giles.
Thank you, Janine. Hello, everybody. My name is Giles Perkins. I'm the Head of Future Mobility for WSP here in the UK, but I'm also the Programme Director for ADEPT Live Labs. And as an introduction to the speakers that we've got today, I'm going to give you a little overview of Live Labs. ADEPT, as you know, local authority organisation, has been working for the last 4 years or so in the space of looking at smart places and what the changing technology means for the local road sector. And Live Labs has been a really interesting journey over the period over the last 4 years of where we've got to, and today we'll provide you a little snippet of some of the more kind of digitally focused things that are happening within the Live Labs program. You'll see from this introductory slide that there's a lot of partners here with Department for Transport, Atkins, EY, Kia, O2, Ringway and WSP. They are all members of the commissioning board that oversees the Live Labs program, and this is key. It is an industry collaboration between the public and the private sector. Next slide, please, Janine. So Live Labs is a £23 million investment programme, first set up a couple of years ago to look at innovation in local roads across a number of areas. The competition process was very, very interesting, that it was quite an open brief that we set, looking at innovation in things like smart mobility, materials, environment, etc., and really asking local authorities what their needs were and how they could innovate to satisfy those needs and challenges that they have. So I'll give you a quick trot through as a primer as to what's included in the programme. So we have Cumbria in the north of England, who are looking at additives into tarmac. So this is how you can do different road surfacing to reduce the use of materials, to use recycled materials, and increasingly to look at how you can use less energy in doing roads resurfacing, critical, obviously, for local roads infrastructure. Staffordshire has been looking at, Staffordshire is very interesting. It had an innovation program within the innovation program. So it's a kind of a live lab within the live lab, very, very SME focused. So they've had e-scooter trials. They're using green walls at sensitive areas within the highway network, acoustic detection using fibre optic, EV pop-up charging, all sorts of different innovations really targeted to their local needs. West Midlands, you'll hear from a very innovative collaborative approach to looking at how people move around the area. Central Bedfordshire focused on energy. So this is kinetic energy harvesting at Leighton Buzzard railway station that's now installed, a UK first. Ground source energy at the Thornturn depot, which is up and running, and being installed at the moment is solar panels actually adhered to the highway surface at Thornturn, as well as along with the ground source, as a means of reducing the energy needs of that major highways depot. The interesting thing about the two highway applications, they're in very heavily trafficked areas. Buckinghamshire Integrated Live Lab, as many of you will know, with Buckinghamshire being a key partner in TDI, really looking at across the whole spectrum, one of our larger programs, everything from 3D printed components through to sensors and everything else in between. Reading, I won't preempt what Alastair's going to say. Suffolk, I won't preempt what Suffolk's going to say, but very large data-led programs really doing the integration piece. And then last and no means least, Kent, focused on how they can maintain the highways asset in a different way, using sensors, using different technologies. And because Kent has got the lane rental fund, which many of you will be aware of, it allows them to generate funds. So they've also done drone trials over live traffic for doing highway inspections. They've been using graphene in the tarmac mix. So innovation on innovation in Kent. So the 8 together, we're working collaboratively. We meet every 2 weeks to share what we're doing. That's technically and on our communications. And it's been a fascinating journey. You'll hear some of that today. Next slide, please. So our headlines: £23 million fund, 8 live labs, 115 discrete locations around England, over 70 suppliers, many of whom are SMEs. So these range from large organisations right the way down to some very agile kind of SME companies. Smart materials, smart communication, smart energy, smart mobility, and obviously smart environment is something that has come out of all of those and being an increasing trend within the live lab itself. Next slide, please. So we've got this mix of projects shown on this slide, this mix of suppliers, everything from sensor manufacturers right the way through to materials suppliers and everything else in between. We had the further innovation competition in the Staffordshire Live Lab, and that itself had applications to it from as wide a field as Mexico all the way through to Australia. If you Google ADEPT Live Labs, you will find the Live Labs page, a huge amount of information in terms of news articles, blogs, white papers, and we're just about to publish our decarbonisation white paper, sharing information. We are in the last quarter now of the programme. The programme is due to finish at the end of this year, December. And what we're doing is we are starting to collect together all of the data, which will be published. So this is an open source program. So all the learnings that have come from all the projects and thematic sharing of information that will allow others to construct business cases will be shared. As part of that externalization, we'll be really ramping up our communication. So you'll see a lot more news articles and things coming out. You will also see us at Highways UK next month, and there's also the Live Labs Expo, and whilst ADEPT has its autumn conference, we're actually going to have a separate expo in Derby at the beginning of December, where we invite everybody to come along and hear about the final reporting, meet the suppliers, meet the people who's been at the sharp end of this innovation program. I think the exciting thing for me, I've been on this journey, is the amount of collaboration that we've seen, local authorities who aren't adjacent to each other sharing and learning from each other, some fantastic relationships built up between people, learning being shared, and real kind of enthusiasm in the face of adversity, because this is one of the few innovation programs that has run right the way through COVID. It did impact us. We were thankfully given a 6-month extension by the department, and it's been very, very challenging. But in the face of all of that, people have really risen and shown the absolute best of what the public sector and the private sector can do in partnership. So I think that's my last slide, Janine, if I remember rightly. If you could nod. Yes, super. And I will hand over to Alastair McMahon from O2, who's going to talk around what's happening in the Thames Valley Live Labs. So thank you.
Take myself off mute. Thanks, Giles. So this is a project which spans a number of different themes, all of which are significant challenges across the Thames Valley. It's an interesting geography in the sense that we captured projects in rural locations, semi-rural locations and urban locations. So very different challenges, really different demographic sectors that we're involving in the projects, and in doing so, our key thing is not to be focused so much on the technology and the proof of the technology. It's about what impact that technology can have on the local population, businesses and different communities. And trying to demystify some of these technologies as well, and some of the issues that we're tackling. And so sort of democratizing data, but helping people understand what that data means for their day-to-day lives. Next slide, please. So underpinning all of the projects that we're doing is mobility data that's come from the O2 network. And this is essentially anonymized and aggregated location data from different periods of time that we are combining with sensor data, with other kinds of data for each of the projects to produce more insights and deeper understanding of what's going on at a local level. Next slide, please. So we're covering congestion challenges across the Thames Valley. We're looking at potholes, air quality, public health and energy. And the idea is, and I'll talk about each of those in a second, but the idea is to surface the data and the insights in a way that businesses and local authorities can then make more informed decisions on these kinds of areas. But another critical element is how do we make that data available to the local population so that they can change their behaviour for the better, to help them improve their health or to tackle challenges like congestion and air quality. So we're creating behaviour change tools which are going live at the moment and will continue beyond the life of the project. Next slide, please. So in terms of how we're tackling congestion, what we're doing is we're taking sensor data from the Siemens traffic network. We're combining that with O2 mobile network data. We are then updating the models that change the way that the traffic sensors respond to congestion. So at the moment, we'll use a lot of Bluetooth technology to provide information to those traffic sensors about what the road conditions are in a particular location. By adding mobile network data, we're spreading the net wider in terms of providing those sensors and the control system with an understanding of what's going on across a wider area. So we can then start to predict trouble or problems that are emerging in one area that might affect another. And that's really just trying to improve the way that we manage those traffic signals so that we can prioritise more sustainable forms of transport and tackle congestion almost before it affects a hotspot, for example. Next slide, please. So what we're doing there is we are, again, as I say, we're putting the mobile network data into the system to help the way that the road car system, which is the Siemens system, predicts traffic problems. Next slide, please. Potholes. This is a project where we're deploying special AI-driven cameras to the front of refuse vehicles. We're using refuse vehicles because they cover a lot of local roads, obviously. And what those cameras do is they measure road surface quality, and that all gets uploaded into a system, and we combine that road surface quality data with mobile network data so that we can look at roads that are for particularly poor quality, that have a high throughput of traffic, and we can place those at the top of the priority list for the local authority to tackle those potholes. Roads where there might be very low throughput and potholes would then go further down the priority list. Next slide, please. And this is what we're doing, is we're building this dashboard up for local authorities to help manage those potholes, so we can see the location, we can see the severity, we can see the traffic throughput on those particular roads. and we're working with a partner there called GPC, who's also been trialling a similar approach across Wales. Next slide, please. Air quality. So again, we're working with Siemens and a startup called EarthSense. And here it's about providing more localized information than the static units currently provide about local air quality. But because we're combining that with mobile network data, we're able to see the population that is being impacted by that air quality at that time, rather than a modelled population, which is typically based on who's at home in a census data set. So this is a more dynamic way of looking at the local the impacts of poor air quality on the local population, and by then surfacing that data, the local population can make choices about their routes to work to avoid any particular hotspots. Next slide, please. So again, that data is being made available in a dashboard. We'll be taking a lot of that data as well and making that available in the behaviour change app that we're working on at the moment with a company called Better Points, another startup. And we've installed currently about 27 of these air quality sensors across Reading. And the good thing about those sensors is they're much lower cost than the traditional static units that are used, and the level of accuracy is very high. So they can be deployed more widely and in a lot of those infill areas where those big static units can't be deployed. Next slide, please. Public health is more about trying to understand public health risks and where they might emerge, so that we can try and tackle those public health risks before they turn into a primary healthcare problem. So the idea with that is we can look at things like air quality, we can look at things like mobility patterns, and we can understand which parts of a local population are most at risk. We would also look at things like loneliness and alcoholism, for example. So by providing local authority officers a map of where those risks are emerging, either as a result of mobility patterns or the local connectivity network, digital and physical, they can then start to prioritise programmes to tackle those emerging challenges. And again, we're making that data available to public health officers in a kind of mapped dashboard so that they can see those things. And this is a critical project because public health officers have really good data on health, but in terms of mobility and transport patterns, they don't have such good data. So this is about trying to fill a hole in the type of information that they currently have access to and making it easy to interpret and understand. Next slide, please. Energy efficiency. So what we're doing here is we're looking at how the emergence of electric vehicles is going to impact the local energy networks and what that means for energy managers in local authorities. You know, what kind of infrastructure are they going to need to provide on their estates? How does the emergence of electric cars change local mobility patterns? You know, are we seeing more short trips emerging where there are high volumes of electric vehicles being purchased because they're seen as a sustainable alternative, and so people might be getting off their bikes back into their cars for shorter trips? That's a problem that this project is sort of looking at in emerging in other areas, so places like Holland and Norway, we've seen higher trip rates emerging where there are hotspots of electric car ownership. So this is about providing a dashboard for those energy managers to help them understand when is the best time to plug in their EV fleet and maximise the benefits of the grid and also on-site renewable energy generation so that they can maximise the carbon saving potential, but also feed-in tariffs as well. Next slide. Next slide, please. I've covered that one. So just to wrap up, because I've run out of time, we'll be producing reports, as Giles said. We'll be sharing these behaviour change applications A lot of the data we're going to share will be surfaced and available in applications as well, so we'll make all of that available. And we also ran a similar kind of program to Staffordshire with a innovation program within an innovation program, where we selected a number of these startups to provide some of these solutions through Telefónica's WIRA program. That's it. Thank you very much. And I'll hand over to Stuart Lester.
Thanks, Alastair. Cheers. So if we go on to the first slide, please, Jenny. Cheers. So just a little bit of quick context, I think, before I go into the main part of the presentation. I lead one of the work streams within our ADEPT Live Lab program, the data stream. So that's what I'm specifically looking at, but I will sort of touch on some of the context of how that's being used to influence our travel demand management, understanding of the network, and improve that understanding of journeys across the West Midlands. So I'm Stuart Lester. I lead the data insight service at Transport for West Midlands, and effectively a lot of the data and analytics work that's undertaken within Transport for West Midlands comes through my team. If we go on to the next slide, please. So prior to the Live Labs project starting, we traditionally collected information from ATCs, pneumatic tubes laid out on the road around a series of cordons and 700 points across the whole of the West Midlands highways network. This was done kind of biannually and effectively gave us 1 week's worth of data that was feeding into our strategic transport models, into some of our understanding of the network. We're still utilising this approach at the moment as we transition to taking advantage of other data sources available, but fundamentally we recognise that we needed to move to a more of a 24/7 approach to getting data to understand all the different conditions that occur, and we also needed to bring down the cost of doing this at the same time as increasing the availability of the data. And the third challenge to that was adding in the fact that we needed to do it from existing assets that were available, as opposed to necessarily deploying brand new kits, in order to be really conscious of revenue costs. If we go on to the next slide, please. The opportunity that presented itself is twofold, really. First of all, we'd been engaging with West Midlands Police, talking to them about their deployment of automatic number plate recognition cameras. There were already some existing across the West Midlands, and as part of the overall ANPR strategic direction from the Home Office, they were looking to increase the amount of cameras deployed. In discussions with them, we discovered that they generally throw away a lot of the data that is the normal data that we were actually paying for from other providers or getting in other different ways. So we recognised that there was an opportunity here to use two parts of the public sector to bring that together for a combined outcome that ultimately reduces the cost to the public purse. Next slide, please. So Giles has covered a lot about what ADEPT is all about, etc. Specifically, the West Midlands Network Resilience Live Lab put forward a proposal about this, utilising this data, how we could then learn a lot more about the patterns of travel, how we could influence journeys, look at the impact of that influence, what works well, what doesn't work well, develop a greater insight on personas of the types of people and how they move around the network, and fundamentally how we can engage with those people to try to influence traveller behaviour, particularly during pre-planning of major events. So, for example, we've got the construction of HS2, the Commonwealth Games coming next year, and a wealth of other events that happen across the West Midlands. Next slide, please. So the introduction of the Regional Transport Coordination Centre has become the kind of focal point for this, taking in the data and becoming that communication channel, working in partnership with the West Midlands local authorities, the UTCs, the transport providers, so that we've got multimodal information coming all into one place, and fundamentally improve our communication levers that we undertake with the citizens, the businesses and the visitors into the West Midlands. That opened just before the pandemic hit, so we were able to have a nice grand opening ceremony before then. It really kicked into action virtually instead, which was a bonus, because the majority of the data, the information, the dashboards, etc., all available virtually. So we've got both a physical space and the ability to decamp to, in this case, people's homes. Next slide, please. Underpinning that that centre, that physical space, and the websites is our concept of a thing called the data engine, and this is where we're bringing in a lot of the information from all these different providers, putting it together, getting a real holistic view of what's happening on the network, and developing our own understanding of what the kind of right thresholds are for alerting, etc., so that we don't spam people with too much messages, get historical trends, learn from that, and use it for some of the forecasting and prediction. Slide, please. So specifically with the data flowing in from the West Midlands Police, but also combining it with other sensors that are starting to be deployed on the network from other providers, we're getting around 4.5 million data points per day coming in. That data itself is hashed and encrypted. I've got a little bit further on about some of the privacy and the ethics that we've looked at through this. So we don't get an actual vehicle registration number, but we do get the classifications, the makes, the models, timestamps of when it was seen at a camera, and crucially engine types as well, which is really helpful for understanding the growth in electric vehicles or the displacement of traffic as they've been policy introductions such as the Birmingham Clean Air Zone. That data then comes into our data pipeline, which I'll come on to in a minute. It's processed in order to develop counts, journey times, and speeds to understand what's happening on the highway network. It's specifically focused on the key route network across the West Midlands, which is where the majority of the deployment of the sensors are, and the responsibility of Transport for West Midlands overseeing that. But that data feeds its way back into the UTCs in each of the local authorities. Next slide, please. So in terms of the solution, we, again, like everybody, end up with a wealth of dashboards that are available to people to really understand what is happening on the network. In this particular case, we're using Tableau. We've got information there from those sensors sending in the data. We compare it to the historical norms that we kind of take from things like Traffic Master for the sort of pre-COVID time, and with the data that's now flowing in, we're storing that up to build our own baselines and norms that we can use for comparative purposes. And we're able to see what's happened in the AM peak this morning, how that compared to yesterday morning, how it compared to the week before, the weeks before that, and over time it will be how it's compared to the months previously and years previously as we build it up. Next slide, please. So a bit of a techie one, so I won't dwell too much into it, but fundamentally we were able to engage with Amazon Web Services and working closely with my team to develop that data pipeline of all those data points coming in and being able to calculate from the raw information things like speeds, journey times, counts at different parts across the network, proving really, really powerful and ultimately very, very cost effective. We're working at real time or near to real time, which is a really important cost decision for us. So, for example, the cost of the data from the police, they're charging us around about £2,000 a year for that data, which is massive saving compared to what we used to spend on data. And in terms of the month to month or the day to day kind of Amazon costs, we've got that to around about $500 per month now because of the fact that we're working at near to real time rather than pure real time, and that's good enough for what we need for our purposes. The next slide, please. So I'll rattle through these last few because what we've been able to do since bringing that into place, we've introduced further cameras for specific events. So there was a major highway change in Perry Bar with the flyover being taken down. Additional cameras went in, working in partnership with the council and the police. That information has come through and enabled us to push out variable message sign information out to the travelling public and really understand what that specific event had on the network. Next slide, please. We've just completed our first round of true machine learning from that data. We're applying Amazon's SageMaker to utilize 2 or 3 different machine learning algorithms, and we are validating the outputs of that. We've got sort of an 85 to 91% accuracy on volumes at each of the locations in terms of a 15-minute prediction ahead of time. So we're doing further testing on that, working in partnership with the University of Warwick, which are all part of our consortium in the live lab itself. Next slide, please. So yeah, what that volume of data is giving us that ability to apply the machine learning and fundamentally check it against the observed data really, really quickly. The different types of algorithms we've trialed at the moment, one of them is able to be run every kind of like 9 seconds against the data and update the prediction accordingly. Some of the more the deep AR techniques, they're kind of like a 1 to 2 hour recalculation of our models, but are providing much higher accuracy. So we've got to balance off how we apply this in the real world situation, which is the next phases we're moving into. The next slide, please. Again, all the data that's then collected then for operational purposes, we're storing for strategic modelling. So because of the locations of the sensors, because of the information we're getting in, we can develop origin destination matrices, see that's for specific classifications such as HGVs, LGVs, etc. So it's really pushing forward the understanding of what's happening on the network and determining and underpinning some of our future business case development. Slide, please, which is again part of our next steps, really combining the information we've got in terms of the real-time information with the additional work strands that are within the live labs. So that population information, looking at the zonal areas where the traffic flows from, comparing it to INRIX data, for example, to really get a much higher precision of GPS traces of where the vehicles move, and then some of the zonal information from mobile network data to understand the people in those origin zones and look at how we target our information and see what's most effective for our resourcing, our costs, etc. Okay, so last sort of couple of slides, really obvious benefits: lowering our costs, increasing public sector organisation cooperation, really working well. We're incredibly proud of what we've achieved so far. I think if we just move on to the last couple of slides, really going back to that privacy, ethics and GDPR, this is some of the outputs that we will be publishing, how we set up memorandums of understanding with the police, how we've introduced new cameras working with the police, engaging with privacy rights groups, local community groups, groups of certain faiths or ethnicities, etc., in order to ensure that they don't feel like Big Brother is watching them and that there's a real good purpose to what we're doing, trying to help improve their journeys around the network. Okay. So yeah, we can skip over that one actually, and that's just my sort of thank you for listening to me. We'll pick up some questions later, and it's my turn to hand over to Richard Webster.
Thank you very much, Stuart. First slide, please, Jane. Okay, well, thank you. I'm Richard Webster. I'm the project director for the Smarter Suffolk Live Labs, and I'm also the street lighting asset manager for Suffolk County Council. So today I'm going to talk to you about our Smarter Suffolk project, how we're using the sensors and experiences we're having across the county, and that's in urban, rural and coastal areas. Next slide, please. Part of flavour of some of the sensors we deployed, I'll focus on adaptive lighting, road surface temperature, highway drainage and air quality. So we're looking at what they are and how we're utilising them on the project. I'll just add it's difficult to know what technologies to deploy, and therefore been working with partners to develop an assets portfolio that will enable authorities to understand the assets they have and the potential that they can unlock. Next slide, please. So to focus on my favourite one, adaptive lighting, we're using a range of different technologies, and these consist of radars, cameras and also traffic loops. These sensors are measuring road use volumes, and in some instances they can then classify the road user, whether that's a pedestrian, cyclist, car, van or lorry. Now, predominantly the sensors have been mounted on lighting columns, mainly on our main roads, and that's because on main roads our street lights are lit all night, but that further increases our savings, obviously. But in some instances we're going to see whether we can extrapolate this data to residential areas. Now, this information is processed on the edge, and through our central management system automatically adapt the lighting levels accordingly, whether that's brightening them up or dimming them. Now, by deploying these sensors, we're already realising energy savings, reducing our costs. And this is over and above changing from traditional lighting to LED lighting. And the savings we're seeing at the moment, depending upon the dimming profiles we're deploying, are actually in excess of 40%, which has been a fantastic achievement. I'd also add that since carrying out this work, we've received no feedback from the public, as the changes are very difficult to notice. And I will say that on one unfortunate occasion, instead of dimming to 80%, we actually dimmed it by 80% and still no one noticed. Next slide, please. So we're coming to that time of year now where I take part in the winter gritting service, and I'm looking forward to it as I do every year. We've now got a number of road surface temperature sensors installed. Now, these are being trialled in a controlled environment by the University of Suffolk's research person at BT's Innovation Centre. Now, these are mainly infrared sensors, and we've strategically located them in geographical areas near to existing weather stations to ensure calibration, but also along individual salting routes. And we're speaking to the forecasting service at the moment to see whether we can integrate the data into their systems to aid with decision making. Now, other sensors have been located in grit bins to measure grit levels and see whether we can gain any operational efficiencies, given that these bins are often located in quite rural areas across Suffolk. Sometimes these bins need replenishing more frequently and others less so, and this gives us the facility to respond accordingly. Next slide, please. Now, I'm not sure other parts of the country, but the weather here has been a mix really of very dry spells followed by very heavy showers, and this is leading to flooding issues. Locations have been carefully selected by drainage colleagues, again, not my field of expertise, and we've got sensors that are measuring gully water levels and also silt levels as well. Part of the work is to integrate this information into coast drainage asset management systems, but one emerging theme that seems to be evolving is whether in areas of flooding, this information can automatically send an alert to messaging sign, maybe to warn road users of flooding ahead. Therefore, we can save on resources, increase efficiency, and provide a better service to the road user. Next slide, please. Now, I've got a number of air quality monitors installed. And again, a common theme, I'm not an expert in this area, but we're working closely with our local council environmental officers to select locations that provide the most meaningful trials. It's become apparent that the measurement of particulates such as PM2.5 and PM10 have been of particular interest, as currently we're not measuring this and there's now a requirement to do so. Now, the air quality sensors are providing a large amount of data, and often the monitors have been supplemented with anemometers to measure wind speed and direction. And this work's now acting as a precursor for additional funding bids, which has obviously been really well received. Next slide, please. When setting these sensors up, latency has been a key consideration. What is the data frequency we require and how will this data be used? In addition, who is actually making this decision and the decision that the data will impact on? Often it's not the same individuals, and therefore there's been varying needs that we've had to account for. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Using adaptive lighting, this requires the data in real time with low latency to adjust the lighting levels accordingly. Now, it depends upon the road use at that time, but we need to be able to react quickly to changes in road use. But we need to be careful that lights aren't constantly dimming and brightening, and therefore an algorithm and a hysteresis has been put in place. This is to prevent flip-flopping by setting trigger periods. These are measured over a period of time, generally tends to be 10 minutes. So over that 10-minute period, once a consistent trigger has been activated, the lights then brighten and dim accordingly. Gully sensing, that's at the other end of the scale. Currently we're receiving data on about a 6-hourly basis, and that's where there's no change in water levels. But in the event that levels change, the data received as changes occur, and then we receive the data much more frequently than we do currently. Next slide, please. Latency challenges, well, we do have some. So, for example, road surface temperature sensors. Currently, the decisions on whether to treat the roads are made up to 12 hours before the action takes place. And although forecasters have requested this data within 20 minutes, and of course, we're able to achieve this because we're getting live data, how will this added granularity be used and how will this impact the number of treatments? This is a question we've posed a number of times and potentially one of the subjects for discussion at our forthcoming hackathon event, because at the moment we can't actually see an answer to this. How can we address this conundrum? Next slide, please. So many different providers are providing many different dashboards to look at. Now, I don't know about everyone else, but I feel I log into far too many programs at the moment, and I don't really have the time or the want to regularly log into another 13 or so dashboards. So we're working with one of our providers to ingest all that sensor data into one place. Now, this provides a very highly technical coding section for developers, but it also provides nice, pretty graphs so that people like me can visualize the data and see the trends. The process has been to identify some of the key issues and challenges and utilize our street lighting assets to power sensors and act as a conduit to send the data. This data is then sent back to bespoke dashboards that in turn enables us to make insights from pulling data together from different sensors. And from this, we aim to improve the services we deliver. So I'll just give you an example of this. Next slide, please. So the data we're getting regarding air quality, well, that can be analysed with the wind speed and direction data. And we hope we can then identify where particulates come from and potentially where they're going to. We can then assess the types of road users and at different times of the day to see whether volumes or types of road user and how that affects the air quality. We can then start to look at transport modelling and seeing whether we can relieve congestion at certain times of the day. Now we're starting to look at this more closely now that we're at the end of the programme, and we're looking at business cases and how these can be formed by each sensor type. Now these won't just be financially driven, but environmentally as well. I will also be seeking to look at stakeholder satisfaction, as that can play a key part. Next slide, please. So again, we're fortunate to live in a county that has urban, rural and coastal areas. It enables most of the work that we're doing to be replicated across the country. How it's important we compare and contrast the technologies in these areas. So in addition to the controlled environment conditions, we have, for example, solar and wind technology powering street lights and providing Wi-Fi hotspots, and these have been located in coastal areas and inland as well. It's been noted at the coast, the wind turbine is being buffeted by strong winds, so much so they've had to actually increase the thickness of lighting columns and replace them to actually accommodate the additional weight of the sensors. But in the rural areas, we're seeing significantly less wind, and this is impacting on both performance and obviously limits the amount of energy generated. I'll add that although the financial business case for this technology appears to be limited, the feedback we've had from the public has been exceptional. Now, the technologies that best suit these areas can differ too. So in urban areas, due to the built environment, often short-range technologies work better, as street lights are more condensed, therefore signals can daisy chain accordingly. In rural areas, long-range technologies have benefits as the signals to be transmitted over long distances, and often there's not the density of columns or the infrastructure to aid with this. I will just add that from personal experience, the higher you mount the sensors away from large buildings and trees, the better. And trust me, we've learnt this the hard way. So my final thought really is that of all this good work being carried out across the country, I think it'd be useful if people knew where to actually find and obtain the information. Therefore, we felt it's an important part of the project that we develop a knowledge share platform where we can post all our reports, other people can post their reports, and obviously we can then challenge the reports and comment on them accordingly. Hopefully people can then assess the work being carried out and not need to reinvent the wheel. Now we'll have a closing event for the Smarter Suffolk project coming up, and obviously I'll share the dates and times when these are known. But obviously I hope this has piqued your interest, and in the event of any questions, please let me know. Now I'll pass over to Giles for Q&A. Many thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you all for your presentations. And we have had a few questions in so far. And if anybody wants to ask questions, as Janine said at the opener, please use the little speech bubble with a question mark in, and those get passed through to us, and we can tackle them as they come in. So the first one, I think, was targeted at Alastair. Can you discuss how you mask personal, individual or neighbourhood level data in the public health application? Is there any concern about labelling certain places as problem places?
It's a good question. So in terms of individual data, there is no individual data in any of our trials. So the O2 data that goes in there is anonymised and aggregated to comply with GDPR. And what we're looking at are really indicators for public health officers to help them understand where risks are emerging. So that's information for the public health officers, and that will then inform them about how they might tackle particular challenges. And also help them feed into the planning process. So if a particular housing development in a particular location has very poor connectivity, and then just looking at the dashboard, they could see potentially that certain age groups might be more at risk from loneliness in those kinds of locations, then that's something that could be flagged up early to planners and developers. So it's really about trying to understand what those long-term trends are that would emerge in the built environment and bring those into the discussion about how we're changing our built environment as we go. But in terms of privacy concerns, it's not something we're looking very much at aggregated trend data rather than sort of specific street level data.
Thank you. The next question that's come in is it's a really interesting one, and I'll ask all three to respond. So to put everybody on the spot here, and if perhaps Stuart first, then Richard, then Alastair. Has the local authorities secured funding to continue the interventions after the end of the Live Lab programme? And what challenges are they faced when constructing business cases, if they have, to take these forward? So this is a legacy question, and thank you for whoever raised this. It's really important that Live Labs was always seen as establishing a new business as usual. And that's something that our Live Labs are all wrestling with at the moment as to how to do that. So perhaps Stuart, if you could go first.
Sure. Yeah. So as I'd mentioned within the presentation itself, one of the drivers for what we were doing was looking at our existing assets and therefore maximising the use of that. So that very much fits into the making more of the funding that's already been spent in the region anyway. The opportunity we had through things like Transforming Cities Fund, we've had through additional capital funding from the Future Transport Zone, etc., is helping us to build our knowledge around how to deploy the technologies, how to maximise the use, how to ensure that they're really good value for money. And then one of the things we have planned for the future is where we have existing technologies, how to gap fill at the sort of cheapest possible way. As an example, again, what I mentioned with Amazon Web Services about working in near real time as opposed to full real time, we recognise that aggregating data into 15-minute bins, providing that 15-minute level of information was good enough for what we needed in terms of both the RTCC, in terms of the data collection over time. The speed with which people can make real-time decisions is a real key thing when you're looking at costing, etc. So all of that has been conscious through the project so far, and then we have some existing revenue budgets that we will be absorbing some of the new costs, such as Amazon Web Services and working with the police into, on the basis of efficiency savings through reduced costs in data collection, etc. So we've got quite a clear one on the data side. We've still got some work to do around the things such as the granular personas, how we refresh some of that information. We've procured some data sets through our process, such as from INRIX or mobile network data, and therefore we've got to look at how we fund that in the future. But what we have developed are the processes to take that data and maximise the use of it in our existing processes now. So therefore it's a data cost in the future and refreshing data as opposed to building whole new processes from scratch.
Fantastic, thank you. Richard?
Yeah, really good question. So I'll give you an example. We're now rolling out 42,000 LED lights over 6 or 7 months, which is obviously extremely challenging. Currently, we part-night light 42,000 assets, which means the change to LED was not really financially viable at the time. But by deploying the traffic counts, by employing the adaptive lighting, that then made the return on investment so attractive that we managed to secure 100% funding. So that's been fantastic. Some of our other technologies, we've actually approached some of the experts, like our transport strategy teams. They've looked at the technology, looked at the figures we've got, looked at the data, and from that they're actually rolling out their own business cases in the back of ours, and have already secured finances to actually roll out our technology further across some of our urban areas. So the business cases and the legacy is a very key one. If we look at our dashboard, for example, and our potential knowledge share platform, again, we're running them well past the programme, so we can invoke that discussion and that debate as well. But I think, as I alluded to before, the business cases are quite challenging, because not only are they financially driven, but you have other things to take into account as well. For example, stakeholder satisfaction and the benefits to the environment. So working again with our partner Proving Services, we've actually looked at the assets portfolio, but building in some of these benefits that aren't just financial. So therefore, at the end, you get a proper benefits analysis and a proper business case. So
fantastic. Thank you. Alastair?
Yeah, I'll pick a couple of examples. So with the energy project, this was really about trying to create a tool that would enable energy managers to improve the saving, increase carbon savings, but also maximise the earnings potential from on-site renewables by plugging them in more closely to the energy markets and the fluctuating pricing. So then that's something that would have a fairly immediate payback on the investment that we've made already, and using that platform on an ongoing basis, it's a pretty strong business case that we feel we developed on that project. Similarly with the project on potholes, we'd be monitoring the claims that the local authority faces in terms of damage to vehicles and personal injury, and looking at the rates of those claims versus the repairs that are ongoing, and building the business case around that. What's more difficult to build business cases on are things like the public health initiative, where we're looking at sort of longer term trends, or the tackling the congestion, where the immediate benefits of reducing congestion across a given area is slightly less tangible, and there's a continued need for data to be fed into those. So for those projects, it's about what other consumers of data are out there that could provide the local authority with a way to monetize the data that's been put together. And so that's something that we'd be exploring on an ongoing basis.
Fantastic, thank you. The next question we've got in it's for Richard. The dimming of street lighting to give savings of 40% is fantastic. Is this all automated, or is there some manual dimming? Also, what is the rough idea of the cost to provide and install the sensors per column? Okay, so we're really putting you on the spot now, Richard.
You are. So it is automatic. Obviously, it depends on the levels that you set the dimming to. So we're looking at two approaches at the moment. One is dimming down 2 classes and then back up again, and like I say, flip-flopping between the two, but making sure the time is built in so that obviously it's not particularly noticeable. So once it's actually set, it is automated. Regarding the costs, well, we're trying to develop the business case at the moment, and as I said before, we're trying to extend the readings we're getting into residential areas. So if you have a main road and you have residential areas coming off this main road, can we therefore use that data to inform on the residential roads? Now, we're not expecting too much of a change or too much of a saving in the residential roads, considering at the moment some of our residential roads are being designed to about 7 or 9 watts, so the saving won't be big there. But on the main roads, that's where we expect the sensors to be, the savings to be. Did I also see how long does it take to actually install? Oh, yeah, cost, a rough idea to install. So I'll be honest, I have installed some of the sensors myself, so bear in mind I'm probably a lot slower than what some of the other people are, but generally about half an hour to probably half an hour to 3/4 an hour to install, so not too long. Cost-wise, as I said, we're working at the moment. I'm happy to share those figures, obviously, when we've finished the business case.
Thank you, and just for everybody's benefit, as I said earlier, this is an open source project, so we'll be sharing as much information as possible, including some of this information around business cases, where we'll be developing a thematic approach to business cases to effectively give industry the jigsaw puzzle pieces to construct your own business cases in the future from the things that we've learned. Back to Alastair and potholes and bin wagons, as we call them in the north of England, refuse vehicles. I do like the sound of pothole sensors on refuse vehicles. However, most potholes emerge in winter when daylight hours are short and weather may be bad. How reliable are the sensors in the dark or in bad weather?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. So we can definitely take that away and ask GPC what they're like in low light conditions. We started installing these sensors earlier in the year, so we have had the benefit of brighter months for running the trial so far. But yeah, I genuinely don't know how sensitive they are and to what degree they'll pick up things in low light conditions. So yeah, we'll definitely take that one away and come back to you.
Fantastic. Another question that's come in: could different authorities use one data engine as a shared platform to economise on costs, i.e. sharing at scale? or are there administrative bureaucratic factors that prevent sharing? I'll give a view on this first, and others please contribute. So the genesis of Live Labs was to not be prescriptive around the sorts of interventions that local authorities came forward, and we have ended up with, well, as you've heard through three projects, that we've got data in all its shapes and forms exists in all of our Live Labs to different degrees. As you've heard, a number of our Live Labs have taken platform-based approaches. These have been driven by local needs and evolving local needs, and as we've heard a little bit, that as platforms get developed, other users then start using them, and then you get this can we just, so it's an evolving process. When we set out on Live Labs, we certainly didn't envisage that there'd be the opportunity perhaps to merge them. But I'd welcome our Live Labs views on how we might do that in the future, or indeed, is there the use case, or actually authorities are different, they've got different needs, they've got different procurement structures, etc., etc. So I will pick on Stuart to start.
Sure, yeah. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's about reflecting some of the local conditions. So in our area, my team are funded by the 7 different West Midlands local authorities, but that doesn't mean we've collectively brought together all the data. There are different challenges on that. There's different approaches, different technologies, fundamentally different capabilities within each of the authorities and within our own team. So for example, we've done a lot of in-house build, working with support from external companies because we've been fortunate enough to grow our team and augment and improve their capabilities, sort of thing. So that's been our approach. But yeah, you've got to reflect the different local capabilities is the key thing here.
Alastair?
Yeah, this is a really good question, and it's something that we've been wrestling with at O2 for a very long time, when actually we started out trying to build a platform that we felt we could then give people access to, and they could use it, and then discovered that was too difficult. And actually, we've now landed on just using some of the great open source technologies and other tools that are out there, like AWS and Azure, that are available. And the skills that are available to use those things are becoming more widespread now, as transport planners are becoming more familiar with data manipulation, and other professions are as well. So the key thing for us, I think, is to make things as open source, as flexible as possible, and not to lock yourselves into any one particular provider, which will give you the flexibility that you need for your local area, for different data sources, different latencies, different storage requirements, and so on.
Thank you. And Richard, 1 minute to
I'll just say yes,
the same.
No, so looking at our dashboard, we've got now our bespoke dashboard. The intention was, as long as it has an API, for example, we can inject it in. We also thought it was important that people could see what they needed to see rather than seeing everything. So different levels of user access. But from a technology point of view, like I said, as long as there's APIs, I don't see an issue. I think one of the concerns that some providers have is if they've spent a lot of money on their dashboard, there might be a reluctance to start pushing that data somewhere else. But as I said, that's the purpose of our project, was to try and have one that ingests all that data into one place.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for our contributors and those questions. And I'll hand back to Janine.
Well, thank you. Wow, what a webinar. Some really good, innovative stories there. And I can only thank all of our speakers today. Very excited about knowing that there are the AI cameras on the refuse trucks, and obviously getting that question answered regarding the timings would be really great. And knowing that there's going to be some maps provided to LAs, on the public health risks to combat things like loneliness, especially around what we've been experiencing recently with COVID and those loneliness figures rising. Certainly understanding what the future demand is as well for the infrastructure all the electric vehicles, knowing that everyone has carbon emission targets to meet. So really some really interesting key things there. So thank you everyone for listening to this webinar. But if anyone does have any questions, you've all got my email address, so please feel free to pop them through. But like I said, I will be sending out the presentation slide deck to you all, the YouTube recording, and any necessary links that the speakers want me to include in the email for you. So yeah, thank you very much. Have a fantastic day, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. So thank you for joining. Bye bye.